10 years, essentially exploring issues of family and family identity and what we can do in our family. And that's how I've spent my time. And I recently wrote a book on Adam and Eve called The First Love Story, which Mimi just mentioned, which is in some ways combining these two things. So essentially, what it is that I have tried to do is, as you heard, is sort of so much attention in the world today is about what's new and what data do we have and what does the research say. And I'm going to talk a fair bit about that tonight. And I'm interested in that, what I call kind of timely knowledge, but I'm also interested in lessons from the past. And do we have to entirely throw out the past? Can we, in effect, combine timely knowledge with timeless wisdom? And what happens when we try to bring and mesh these two worlds together? And in effect, the question I've been asking as it applies to families is, what is it that families do right? What is it that happy families do well? And what can I learn from them to make my family happier? And so what I want to talk about tonight is about where are we at this pivotal moment of disruption in every other world. We know that industry has been disrupted. Politics have certainly been disruptive. World affairs have been disruptive. What about the family? I actually think we are in a moment when family is being disrupted, but somehow the language that we use to apply to the rest of the world, we somehow forget to apply to disruption in our own lives. I think one of the moments that really encapsulate this for me and got me interested in exploring this was I grew up in Savannah, as I said, and we used to spend the summers on Tybee Island off the coast of Savannah. And still my family gathers there every year in a sort of extended kind of Camp Feiler thing, Camp Feiler experience for all the grandchildren. And about 5 or maybe 6 or 7 years ago, we got there, and my little sister was the first. We were maybe the first to arrive. And at the time, I have identical twin girls. They are named Eden for the Garden of Eden and Tybee for this island that I'm talking about. And basically, in the early years, we were busy playing defense. Let me just do a show of hands. Who in here, anybody prepared to say in this room that they are pregnant or about to have a baby? Okay, anybody here? No, you're not going to. Anybody here have children in diapers? Anybody here have children in diapers? Okay, a couple of hands. Anybody children in elementary school? Okay. Anybody have children in middle school? Okay, children in high school? Okay, children in college? Okay, children out of college still, wait. Let me finish. Children out of college still living at home? Oh, look at that. See, there we go. Children out of college not living at home? Okay, there we go. That's sort of the golden ticket. Children out of college not living at home in a relationship or married? Okay, okay. Any of those children out of college not living at home, presumably with spouses, have grandchildren? Okay, who's got grandchildren? Okay, fine. So we've got this wide diversity. So when your kids are very young, you're playing defense, okay? Right? So it's sippy cups and diaper caddies, and things are coming at you and you're reacting. But then you enter this period where you can develop a family culture. And my wife, by the way, warned me tonight when I was coming out here not to talk about Neanderthals. But I can't talk about the family today without talking about Neanderthals. And what I mean by this is human beings have something that no other species on Earth has. And that is every other species, when their children are weaned, okay, when the children stop feeding from the mother, when the children are weaned, they can have children themselves. Okay, so they go right from being weaned to being capable of reproduction. We don't have that. Okay, human beings have this very long period, okay, 10, 15, depending on how you want to count, 25 years, right, where they can be independent, but they're not independent, essentially, okay? I think of this as sort of potty training to, first job, or potty training to the, right, or from the first step to the first kiss, or maybe the first grandchild, or whatever it is. We have this, but why do we have that? It's because that is the time when we are socialized, where we learn how to interact, where we learn language, where we learn essentially how to be a family and how to be a community. This is a central part of being alive, and that's why we have this period where our families can teach us what it means to be a family. And so what was happening is, so we were stopped playing defense, and we were ready to play offense, okay, but we didn't know how to do it. And my sister came next. She had adolescence at the time, and she was dealing with drinking and drugs and bullying and cyberbullying and technology and all these things that we all struggle with. And she came next, and my older brother came next. He was not married at the time. And he was very focused on my parents, right? Could we, was it time to put dad in a wheelchair full time? Could we ask mom to stop driving, right? So I was sort of I'm a classic member of the sandwich generation, like squeezed between rising children and declining parents. And as my father memorably said, it's much easier to bring up children than it is to bring down parents. And I would say lots of nods in that room, right? And so we all get together, and sure enough, these issues spill out onto the table, because I look over, and there's my 14-year-old nephew, and he's texting under the table. Okay? So I know, trust me, I know I'm not supposed to say anything, but I couldn't help myself, and I asked him to put his phone away, and boom, it was as if a mushroom cloud erupts. My sister snaps at me not to parent her children. My mother points out that from her point of view, none of the grandchildren has any manners. My dad observes that it was my children who were balancing spoons on their noses. My brother complains that we can never have an adult conversation with all these children around. And my wife gets up to go to the kitchen to get ice cream, which is exactly what her mother would do in that circumstance. And I say, but wait a minute, the girls have not finished the vegetables. And at that point, everybody squooshed off to different corners of the house. And that night, my father, he's aging, he's Parkinsonian. He calls me to his bedside, and there's this kind of quiver in his voice. And he said, our family's falling apart. And I said, oh no, we're not falling apart. We're stronger than ever. And lying in bed that night, I was wondering, is that true? What is the secret sauce that holds some families together? How come some of them are able to bounce back from difficulties? And basically, where do we turn? I turned to my wife the next morning. I said, who do we turn to make sure our family works? And that really is the question I've been asking. And really, I want to bring you some ideas from my travels here tonight in the hopes that it will start a conversation in your family. So before I get started, there are some more big think on families, exactly the stuff my wife tells me not to do, but there are 4 big changes in the family in the last generation, okay? Change number 1 is a change in the definition of the family, okay? It's no longer the Leave It to Beaver family that we all remember, the nuclear family. We now have adoptive families, we have gay families, we have divorced families, we have divorced families who are living in the same house, you have separated, married couples who are living in different houses, you have nesting, you have blended families. So there's a huge change in the definition of what it means to be a family, much broader. I mean, in New York, where I live, there are plenty of women who are having children without partners at all. So a huge broadening, and I suspect if you could go back through the annals of the JFS and other family service organizations in the last 25 years, you would see exactly these kinds of conversations about what does family even mean anymore? We're at a moment of a broad, much more open, much more inclusive definition of what the family means. That's change number 1. Change number 2 is a change in the role of women in the family. So we now know 3/4 of all women work outside the home while they have young children. That is the largest number that we've ever seen. This is a whole slew of issues that from my point of view are talked about a lot. Obviously, I have a working wife who is very involved, and she's on 3 corporate boards, and she runs, I just will briefly say, my wife Linda started and runs an organization called Endeavor that supports entrepreneurs in now 30 countries around the world. So she's got 500 people working for her and a budget of 30 million globally, and she is involved in all these different countries in these questions of work-life balance and can we have it all and lean in. So the second big change is the role of women. But there's an equally big change that's talked about far less. that in some ways I think may be just as much, if not a greater influence on the family today, and that is we have the first generation of involved dads. Okay? And this is a sociological experiment that the likes of which we have never seen, and very few species. There's like some birds in the Galapagos where the dad sits there, and then the dad goes off and brings things, and then the female bird basically sort of says to the male bird, or maybe doesn't say, but communicates to the male bird, well, why don't you sit on this egg for a while, and then boom, the woman goes off and finds herself another mate, and then the dad is sitting there. But basically very few active dads. And fascinating is that this question of involved dads is something that's almost essentially not been studied. A lot of what we think about the role of moms in the family come from the fact that for the first 100 years of psychology, essentially the role of dads was never studied. It's only for the last 20 years or so that anyone's even looked at dads, and what we're beginning to see is that dads play a different role. So take, for example, roughhousing, right? We know that dads can be very physical, and it turns out that this act of stimulation very important to children. Here's just one small example from a study I was looking at recently. Mom takes a kid to the pool. Kid does not know how to swim, okay? Here's the pool. Here's the pool. Here's the kid, okay? Where does mom position herself in this story? Answer, between the pool and the kid. Come on, sweetheart, I support you. You can do it. Get in. It'll be okay. Dad takes kid to the pool. Here's the water. Here's the kid. Where does the dad position himself? Answer, behind the kid. Get your butt in the water and you'll figure it out like I did, okay? So fascinating that they are playing different roles here, moms and dads, and we're just beginning to understand the impact of having this. But one of the impacts of this is that what used to be the membrane that divided work from family is no longer there, okay? So you have, what you have is moms and dads at work, both interacting with the children in some way or another, or a caretaker during the day, okay? Maybe a dad leaves to work early to coach Little League, or mom leaves work early to coach, to take a kid to the doctor. They come back, then they're in that prime family time in the late afternoon, early evening. And then I said, I won't do it, but I suspect if we had a show of hands of what time do we start here, 7:30, we're going to be out of here at 9:30. If I asked how many people here will go home and log on and do work email when you got home, my guess is at least half the hands would come up. So what happens is work is being done at the end of the night, and the previous sort of dividing lines between family and work are being erased in very provocative and frankly, completely not yet known ways. And the fourth big change is generational. Okay, so let's just briefly look at the generations. So you have baby boomers who were born technically from, say, 1946, right? This is the baby boom after the war, until 1964. I was born in 64. Exactly why that still qualifies as a baby boom, is questionable, but you have that generation. Then you have the Xers. So the Xers would be born from the mid-60s, say, to 1980. My wife, born in 1969, is an Xer. And now, here come the millennials. Now, some of you, I don't know if some of you may have seen or not seen, but I spent the summer looking at millennial parents for a big article that was in the New York Times 4 days ago, and it was about this new generation of millennial parents. I call them perennials. And so the truth is, while the rest of us have been busy hating on millennials, guess what? They've been growing up and settling down and having children. Okay, so the millennials were born in 1980 to 2000. That means the tip of the spear of them is 34, 35, 36, 37, and they're now having children. 16 million millennial moms or millennials are already moms. That grows by 1 million a year. 5 out of every 6 babies is born to a millennial mom. That's 82% of children born in the United States is born to a millennial parent. And the signs already are that they're doing it differently. So if you were in the business at JFL or elsewhere of serving these or in schools, you're looking at a completely different set of values, okay? So just a quick kind of word on this. The first biggest difference is technology, okay? So this generation is growing up used to technology. as somebody I talked to was saying, that basically Google has become the new nanny, the new grandparent, the new doctor. So they are technology heavy. Their first question is not, I mean, what did we do when I had young children? Like, we called our parents, even though their experience was frankly so outdated as to be quaint, right? Or we talk to our friends who were just as clueless as we are. Well, now everybody goes to Google. So the good news is they are what the experts call high information parents, but the bad news is they think that there's like one right way to do it, right? Or that they can find the answer, and they are often paralyzed by all this information. And they have all these, I talked to one woman, there are these apps now, right? When you get pregnant, you have this app that will send you a picture of your fetus every week. Now it's a peanut, right? Now it's a walnut, right? Now it's an apricot, as if this is somehow meaningful, right? So there's been this sort of fruitification of fetuses, right? I just made that up on the spot. So, but what happens is, and then when they're born, these apps, they're desperate to keep you, so they start sending you emails that say, oh, now your child should be focusing out the window. Now your child should be smiling or laughing or pooping or vomiting or whatever it is. First of all, as if they need an app to tell them that, right? But the problem is there's pressure, and so this one mom, she was like, oh my gosh, I just found out that Wonder Week stops at 1, and what am I going to do? So they are very reliant on technology, but there's a huge stress upon parents that wasn't there before, which is to curate the perfect child. Okay, parents have to make a decision. Do you want to be like Beyonce, right, with little perfect pictures of your child with great lighting, or do you want to show your child that just pooped in the bathtub, right? So there's this huge pressure of what do you want to be? Do you want to be fantasy parent, or do you want to be sort of, drunk out of control parent? And that's an added pressure on parents they've never had before. So technology is the first biggest change. The second is this issue of what are the moms going to do and what are the dads going to do, okay? And the first thing that I learned that was shocking is these terms, mom and dad, so 1970s. I talked to this dad in Portland. He said, well, when we got pregnant, we went through a rough patch, and we went through counseling, and the first thing I learned was, don't say mother and father, say co-parent, okay? So we are now entering the gender neutrality phase of parenting, where it's a co-parent. And she said, the truth is, we know, this banker told me in Portland, he said, we know that 50-50 is a pipe dream, right? But we try for 60-40. So these six, the beginning, it was 60-40 my wife, because I had a big work presentation. Now my wife has decided that she's got to go back to graduate school to get a good job, so now it's 60-40 me. So we begin every year with the goal that it'll be 50-50 by year's end, but we know at any given time it will not be 50-50, okay? So one thing, if you are a grandparent here and you have children who are going through this, is understand that what they're doing is constantly shifting who's going to be the primary caretaker. And then the last big thing is, I will say, has to do with religion, because here we are at it's there, right? The J and JFS. And that is, they're looking at religion also as a fluid thing. Okay, so already religion is much more fluid than we talk about. Half of Americans will change faith in the course of their lives, 50%. 4 in 10 Americans are in an interfaith marriage or an interdenominational marriage of some kind. And they're all feeling this pressure. I talked to a man also in the Northwest who grew up as a missionary in Eastern Europe, and he wasn't talking to his father for the first 6 months because the father wanted the child to be baptized. And you're beginning to hear stories, by the way, of basically grandparents abducting their grandchildren and forcibly baptizing them behind the backs of the parents. So you have to understand, they are much more fluid and much more DIY, as I'm sure you know, about religion, and this also has huge consequences. So there are big changes coming in the shape of the family. Having said that, I think that there are some things that I've learned that what we can say about what is it that makes certain families work. So when I set out on this journey, shall we say, a decade ago, thinking and writing about families, and became ultimately 2 books and 100 New York Times columns. One of those books, what's today? A week from today, I'm flying to Los Angeles because one of those books is about to be developed by NBC as a drama to go with This Is Us next year. We'll see how that works out. So one of the things when I set out to this, I had 3 rules, one of which I made to my wife, and 2 of which I made to myself. I kept the one I made to my wife, and I violated the two that I made to myself, which is right choice, ultimately. The promise I made to my wife was basically, she's like, I don't want any theory. Show me actual families that are doing things, and we can try it in our family. I got it. I married a circus clown. I got it. I'm trying new things, but I want to do real things, and that's what we've done. The two I violated for myself were, number one, I said that I didn't want to speak to any therapists. Okay? We're 100 years after Freud, and they've had their say, and it's still not working for most of us. Okay? So I wanted interesting ideas that were coming from a new and different space. I violated that once. I spoke to a sex therapist, and I was happy that I did, but it doesn't seem like the right setting to go into that. The other thing that I promised myself that I violated was that I wasn't going to take whatever I learned and cram it into one of those lists, right, of 5 or 7 or 10 things that you have to do to have a happy family. Because I don't know about you, but I can't stand those lists, right? I disagree with number 4, I can't remember number 7, and I think my kids will never get into college, right? But it turned, so I wasn't going to make a list. But what happened was the things I kept hearing sort of fell into familiar buckets. So I stand here today with my sort of non-list list of things that high-functioning families have in common. So this is my 3 items. The first item is high-functioning families adapt all the time. One of the smartest things I ever heard from about parenting came from a friend of mine, Justin, who at one time had 4 kids under 6. Now 2 of them are at Yale, as it happens. And he said, with children, everything is a phase, even the good parts, okay? And so what we know is that parenting is this rapid-fire thing of reacting and adjusting, okay? First you've got the sippy cups, then you add the nap, okay? Then you add school, then you add homework, okay? Then you add screen time, then you add Facebook, okay? Then you add college sports, then you add college applications. Mom has a business trip. It's crazy. You're constantly adjusting all the time, and you don't know which way is up. It's no wonder that Salvador Minuchin, who's the great family theorist, was the great family theorist at Harvard, said the number 1 rule of families is to be adaptable. And yet that's not how we talk about it. So how do you do that? I went a few years ago to Hidden Springs, Idaho, in population 1,295, I think at the time that I was there, just outside of Boise. And I was with a family called the Starr family. And what I witnessed there was astonishing. And it really changed my thinking about this role of adaptability and flexibility and change that all of us have to understand, any of us who are in a family at any point in the process that we went through a few moments ago. At 6 o'clock on a Sunday night, they sat down to the highlight of their week, which was a family meeting. But just briefly to tell you what I saw on Monday morning. So I got up at about 6 o'clock, and Eleanor, who was the mom, a stay-at-home mom in this family, she comes downstairs, makes herself a cup of coffee, and sits there as one after another, her 4 children between the ages of 8 and 12, comes downstairs, checks this morning list that they have, makes themselves breakfast, okay, checks the list again, puts their dishes in the dishwasher, checks the list again, has their morning chores. One fed the pet, one put the laundry in, one put one folded towels, checked the list again and gathered their belongings and went out to the bus. And when I said to her that this was the most astonishing family dynamic I had ever seen, and I said, how did you do this? And she said, well, the truth is I got so frustrated I didn't know what to do, and she turned to her husband, David, to his workplace. And they brought this idea of Agile that Mimi mentioned into their family. So who's here? Anybody works? Anybody heard of Agile or in a company that works Agile? So Agile is this new idea. It's a fascinating story that I won't go into. You can read about it in a number of places in The Secrets of Happy Families or the TED Talk that I gave about this. The core idea was that most things in the world were done through, and most businesses were run as waterfall. A waterfall is where someone at the top issues orders, and it trickles down to people below, and they execute the orders, okay? And this began to break down initially in the world of software. An executive would say to the team, go make me some software. The team would come back a year and a half later. 83% of projects were late, over budget, or completely irrelevant by the time they came back. And so they began breaking things down into small groups that met all the time, that had daily stand-ups where they reviewed, weekly meetings, and this has swept the world, okay? From GE to Facebook, to Google, to Amazon. Jeff Bezos has a rule that no problem can be solved at Amazon with a team that 2 pizzas can't feed. Okay? And so what happened was these people began to bring this into the family and had this idea of adaptability into families, which is an extremely powerful idea. You can see it in this morning checklist where kids are responsible for their own behavior. But I want to just talk briefly tonight under this rubric of this idea of a family meeting. So let's just see a show of hands. Who is in a family, grew up in a family, is in a family with your children, your grandchildren, who has meetings of any kind on any sort of regular basis? Okay, we have a small smattering of hands. I have seen this now around the country. In fact, I'm flying to Grand Rapids on Saturday to give a talk at a family meeting of one of the 50 wealthiest families in the country. We have been doing this now for 6 years in my family, where every Sunday we have a meeting. It's about 20, maybe 30 minutes, and we ask 3 questions at this meeting that are taken directly from this Agile idea. And we do it, actually I have to say now, we do it in my extended family, the family I grew up in, where 3 generations have meetings. This family meeting I'm going into in Grand Rapids on Sunday will have 4 generations in this family meeting. We asked 3 questions. What went well in our family this week? What didn't go well in our family this week? And what will we agree that we will work on in the week ahead? And so everybody goes around. What worked well? Oh, handling mom's business trip. Oh, greeting visitors at the door. My children are shy, so we used to have to work on exercises to get them to greet visitors. What didn't go well? Oh, making your bed without being asked, or showing respect to your elders. I'm sure none of you have this problem in your families. We have this problem occasionally in mine. And then what we do is we have all these ideas on the table, and then we pick 2 that we're going to work on. And here's the key to the whole thing, is we have our children help pick the rewards and punishments that we're going to implement in that week. First of all, what requires a reward and what requires a punishment? Greeting visitors at the door hardly seems like it's punishable, right? But maybe, using technology when you're not supposed to, maybe that's worth a punishment. Because there's another difference in families today, which I didn't mention earlier, which is that we have this secret thing that we now are able to look inside children's brains. And we know that children who participate in making their own schedules, evaluate their own work, help plan their lives, build up their prefrontal cortex, what the psychologists tell us are executive skills, and help begin to run the world around them. And that's the key point here before we move on. Nothing is a waterfall anymore. Not business, look around, not government, not military, not sports teams, nothing is top-down anymore. The world has changed. And I can get my kids to do what they don't want to do, maybe once or twice, but we all know that doesn't work in the end. And then our job as parents and grandparents is to make our children ultimately, children are born entirely dependent on us, and our job is to make them independent from us. Okay? Our job in families is to put ourselves out of business. Okay? And if you're in a world where the adults have all the authority, then that is not serving the children. We have to prepare them for the bottom-up world that they are going to enter. So a family meeting is a great structure to do that. So adapt all the time. This is great. Try it this week. If it doesn't work, try it next week. What's the second big thing that I've learned? High-functioning families, they adapt all the time. And then 2, they talk a lot. Okay? And I'm not just talking about difficult conversations. It sounds like one of your lectures was about this. I love this. Actually, I've written a lot about this, what to do if there's an adult alcoholic in your family, when to pull the plug on grandma, these kinds of decisions that are very real and difficult in families. But what I want to talk about here is something that you all are doing every day, and I want to encourage you to do more, which is to talk about what it means to be part of a family. So a couple of ways that I've seen this work that are quite magical. One is that you can write a family mission statement. Okay? I talked to Jim Collins. Jim is the author of Good to Great, the defining management book of the last 25 years. And what Jim said to me is that any well-run organization has 2 things in common. Okay? Number 1, it stimulates progress, and this idea of adaptability, trying new things, adjusting as circumstances change. that's that. But if you adapt all the time, you're going to not function. Okay? So the opposite of that is preserve the core. Stimulate progress and preserve the core. And so Jim advised us to go through this process of creating a family mission statement. And when I first heard it, I have to say, I thought it was cold and corporate and corny. Okay? So I was a circus clown, so I can handle corny. I wrote a book about country music. And then someone asked me a question I'd like to ask you. If I went to your children or to your grandchildren or your nieces and nephews, whoever in your extended family that might be gathering in 2 weeks for Thanksgiving, if I went around the table and I said, what values are most important to your family, to anybody under 21 in that room, would they be able to answer it? Now, when someone asked me that, I thought, well, I'd like to think that they could, but the truth is, have we actually articulated it? So he coached us through this process, and I have to say, if my wife were standing here, she would say of the hundreds of things we've tried in our family, this was one of the top 2. Family meeting would definitely be number 1. So we had the family equivalent of a corporate retreat. It was called a pajama party. So somebody had bought us Hannah Anderson striped pajamas when they're matching, and I'd never opened them, actually. Unfortunately, I started talking about this, and I had to wear them in a People magazine photo shoot. But anyway, so we got, and I learned that my kids thought popcorn came from a movie theater or a microwave. We'd actually never made popcorn. So I went, and the grocery store around the corner from me in Brooklyn Heights had Jiffy Pop. And so I bought one, and I thought, Jiffy Pop has a high burn rate, and by that I don't mean entrepreneurial. So I bought 2. I went home. Sure enough, we burned the first, filled the house with smoke. We were on our way to a memorable experience. So we had this popcorn. We got in bed, and we had the most amazing conversation. I'd asked my wife to bring home a flip chart, and we taped it up on the wall, and we had a series of questions. I had gotten a list of values, actually, from Tom Peters and from the KIPP charter schools or whatever, and we went through all these, okay, what values are most important? And here's the thing, if you're going to do this in your family, you got to be tough. Like Jim said, if you have 35 items on your family mission statement, like, it's meaningless. Okay, so like we looked at honesty. Honesty is the best policy. I mean, frankly, I don't even say that. My view is don't lie to me, which is somehow different to me than telling the truth. My wife and I disagree. Anyway, honesty didn't make the list. So we went through, and we are a family of sayings, and so we ended up with all of these sayings. My wife likes to say, I don't like dilemmas, I like solutions. We like to travel. So one of ours was be a traveler, not a tourist. Another one was we dream undreamable dreams. So we ended up with this thing. We ended up printing it, hanging it on the wall. But a few weeks later, we had a chance to use it. One of my first graders got into a spat at school about breaking a pencil. Okay, and we got a call from the teacher. We're like, oh my God, we've got a mean girl. What are we going to do? So we get summoned to the principal's office, and we go there, and we hear this story, and we come back, and my wife was like, we got to do something. So you can imagine, she went to Harvard and to Yale Law School. She wasn't exactly used to being called to the principal's office, right? So we call my daughter in, and I've already said to you, my wife is this commanding person, and it was kind of cute, and she had no idea what to do. She was totally stammering and bungling, frankly, the whole thing. And the flip chart was still on the wall of my office, which is right next to my daughter's bedroom. And so I said, hey, look up there. Any of those ideas seem to apply here? So she scans down, and she gets to, we bring people together, and boom, we had a way into this conversation. So I mentioned positive psychology earlier. One of the things that we've learned from positive psychology is if you have a goal, if you want to achieve something, you need to articulate that goal, okay? You want to run a marathon, you need a plan, right? You want to souffle, make your souffle stand up, you need to work at it, okay? The psychologists call this your best possible self. You have to articulate your best possible self if you're going to achieve your best possible self. This was the collective equivalent of that. It was us articulating our best possible selves. Now, do we stand in front of this mission statement, hold hands every morning, and sing Kumbaya, our family theme song, right, before they go off to school? No, okay? Half the mornings we're still pushing and, grabbing to get the coats and the earmuffs on. But the truth is, it's still there. So when something big happens, we can go back to it and remind ourselves that this is who we want to be. So there's a very simple idea that's easy to do, write a family mission statement. Next, I want to talk, and not only because we're in Stamford, but I have to say in part because we're in Stamford, I want to talk a little bit about another incredibly awkward topic in families. I want to talk about money, okay? Here's a statistic that spun my head around the first time I heard it. 80% of children get to college never having had a conversation with their parents about money. Where it comes from, where it goes, how to earn it, how to save it, what debt is. 80% of children, okay? But here's the thing. If you think you're not passing on values, if you think that you're not passing on values to your children by not doing it, the truth is you are passing on a value, which is this is not something that we talk about, or that we can talk about, or that we should talk about. I went to see Byron Trott. Byron Trott grew up on the wrong side of the tracks in Missouri and now lives in a 60,000 square foot home on Lake Michigan, okay? He advises 100 of the top 100 wealthiest families in the United States. He never talks to the press, but he agreed to talk to me. And I went to like the 400th floor of some bank in Manhattan that he was visiting, and he had one of those leather folders, and he pulled out this list of the 100 wealthiest families that he represents. And I'm like, I'm a reporter. I'm like, can I see the list? And he slaps it shut. And I said, so Byron, these families must know something. What wisdom do they have that I can take back to my family? Well, the first thing he said was, they ain't any smarter than your family. In fact, a lot of it have the problem. And the first thing I tell them is what I've just said to you, is show them the money in age-appropriate ways. Find a way to talk to them about this. But the other thing he told me, so I was talking to him about allowance. So we were doing this thing. We wanted to pass on money. I'm trying to think let's do a show of hands. Who the children or grandchildren think, who here knows that any children they're around have chores in the family? Raise your hand. Grandchildren, even your grandchildren have chores when they come to your house? Come on, grandparents, if they come to your house, give them something to do, for gosh sakes. Don't just give them toys and candy, give them some jobs. How many of them get paid for this? Okay, so I wanted to know, is this a good idea to pay for chores? The research here is very clear. If you actually pay for chores, they're doing it for the money. They're making the bed for the dollar or the quarter, and the problem is later you want them to do it without it, and the quarter won't mean anything to you. So we decided to separate, but we wanted to pass on these money values, and so I was telling this to Byron Trott. And I said, so we give $1 per child per age. So a 7-year-old gets $7 and a 10-year-old gets $10, and we make them we divide it into 4 pots. Spend, save, give away, and something we call spend, save, give away, and share, which is money that we have to choose to spend as a family. Using on vacation, we buy something, so we're having to talk about what's worth the money or not. And he said, okay, well that's great, but I wouldn't force them to do this. I was like, oh, I know. But I want to teach them these values, and on the save, we give them 1% interest a month. I mean, I'd like 1% interest a month, but we want to incentivize them, so we make them do this. It's pedagogic. He's like, I wouldn't do that. I let them decide for themselves how they want to do this. I said, well, it kind of misses the point, because what if they make the wrong decision, or they want to buy something and they haven't saved? And I said, what if they drive into a ditch? And he said to me, one of the single best sentences I've heard in all these years writing about families, which is, it's much better to drive into a ditch with a $6 allowance than it is with a $60,000 a year salary or a $6 million a year inheritance. So why are kids running up so much debt? Why are they making these mistakes? Because they haven't had practice. And the same thing I was saying earlier about the family meeting, you want to bring the young people in your extended orbit into this process, let them make mistakes when the stakes are very low. So when the stakes get higher, they have practice. So talk about money. I then next want to talk briefly about technology. I could talk about this all night, but I won't. But I just want to say about children and families and technology that as fearful as you are about this, my message to you is, it's far worse. My 12-and-a-half-year-olds, just to show you how dead serious I am, do not have phones. They go to, it's literally the last thing they say before they go to bed every night, and the first thing they say when they get up in the morning is, when are we gonna get a phone? Everybody has a phone. You're ruining our lives. Tomorrow, actually, in my children's school, 8:45, is parent conferences, and we've said that we will have the next conversation to even consider this, depending on what we hear. But I've written a lot about this, and I just want to tell you a little bit about kind of what I see about there, because you can't have a conversation about the family today without talking about technology. So the first thing I want to say is when it comes to looking in screens in families, the first screen you need to look into is a mirror. Because unfortunately, we are modeling exactly the bad behavior that we want our children not to have, okay? So that's the first warning. We're all not so good at this. Essentially, human beings are born, back to Neanderthals, human beings are born with the ability to pay attention to others, okay? They know this because they can actually look at the hairs inside what's that called? The inside of your ear, or whatever that part where the hair is, when they're in the womb, and when it's a familiar voice, the hairs stand on end. So they know that children can recognize, and they are born, we know from a very early age, that newborns can recognize people. We are born to attach to others. But the truth is the skill lies dormant for a long time, and you have to practice it. So girls learn the skill of reading nonverbal communication between 8 and 12, and boys learn it never. But anyway, a little bit older. So we're told. By the way, I've told this story about Cliff Nass for a long time, and no one ever laughed at that part. And I was in San Diego recently, and they laughed, and I was like, oh my God, there's a hidden joke in here. I have to milk the joke. So he said kids aren't learning it today because they're so busy looking at screens. And there's been some research. The group in UCLA did this research, and they sent people to a camp. And the way they gauge nonverbal communication is they hold up a picture, and you look at the facial expression of a non-talking, still photograph, and read the face. So they had these kids, and some kids went to a camp for a week and didn't have screens, and the other ones stayed in their normal lives. And when they came back, the kids who had not looked at the screens were able to read the nonverbal communication better. So the good news is it bounced back relatively quickly. The bad news is we're not having this skill. And you see this. Anybody who works with teens or is around teens knows that it's extremely hard to make eye contact with teenagers, okay? And what Cliff was saying to me was when you get to college, where everybody is essentially, you know what's not happening in college? Dating is not happening in college. Why? Because this kind of face-to-face communication is overstimulating for teens today, which is why they group date, and then they have these impersonal hookups, because making these human connections. By the way, if anyone here has to talk to a teen, maybe in your family, your extended family, maybe, as I said, Thanksgiving or the holidays coming up, it's much easier to have a meaningful conversation with a teen if you're not looking at them. So if you're taking a walk, a car is a good place because they're trapped, they can't go, but they're not looking at you. It's actually much easier. So the technology here is very frightening, beyond all the reasons that you think. And I actually believe that where this story is going, whoever's going to give the 16th or 20th Cohen speech here in the future is going to be talking about what I call the end of parents, right? Which is that we are basically, what is giving your child a phone doing? Essentially giving the authority over a huge percentage of that child's time to the biggest, most manipulative, and we now know not that bright, organizations in Silicon Valley. So you're saying Apple or Google or Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat is now responsible because they're taking more and more of the precious time that we have when our children are not with their friends or their school. Children between 12 and 15 spend half as much time with their parents and twice as much time with their peers. Okay? So the time that is parental time, we're giving over to Facebook and to Snapchat. Okay? And Snapchat came out yesterday and said, we don't know what kids are doing. We're going to revise ourselves. This was yesterday. And if we learned anything in the last month, Facebook has no idea how people are manipulating their platform. Okay? The Russians are doing it, and their response is, we never even considered that this would happen. So the truth is, we are forfeiting. I think we're going to go from a helicopter parenting narrative where we've been for the last 25 years with parents hovering to this parents literally clinging to the footsteps of, to the feet, to the heels, to the toes of our children as they get sucked into this web of big corporations who don't care about our children. Their job is totally different. It's a quarterly estimate, making Wall Street happy, selling things to them. So we are in a huge moment of inflection as we give control of, as we give our children technology. And by the way, I'm saying my 12-and-a-half-year-olds are not doing it. Now 10, 9, 8, 7-year-olds are getting this technology. So one thing is for a 12-year-old when it is their job to go off and learn to be themselves, and our job to hold their hand through it. But to give it to somebody under 10, that's a very frightening thing, and that is the big change that's coming. So to me, talk to your kids about technology. No kid should have a phone. Every family, I don't care how old the children are, should have rules, whatever, contracts, whatever you want to do. You need some policy. And the easy things are no phones at tables, no phones in the room after 8 o'clock. The research is very clear. Anybody's got a kid, anybody's got a phone in their bedroom at night is staying up an hour later and getting less sleep, doing less homework. Charge them in public places, have rules, and have, perfect for all the grandparents here, what we call a good grandmother rule of social media is a good thing. Don't put it on social media if you wouldn't want your grandmother to see it. The last thing I want to talk about here, and then we're going to open it up to questions, is, in all the years I've been writing about family, the single most interesting idea that I've encountered. I wrote about this in the New York Times a few years ago. It was the most emailed article at the paper for a month. There's a website, there's an app called Pocket, I'm looking for my phone, that allows you, I shouldn't tell you this as a reporter, to download articles and read them later, and they strip away the ads, and they put all my friends out of business. The 80 million articles, I think, saved on Pocket that year. This was the second most saved article on the entire planet for the entire year. And the idea was this: tell your family history. Researchers at Emory, Marshall Duke and Robin Fivish, did a study back in 2001 in which they asked children 20 questions off of what I call the do you know scale. Do you know where your grandparents were born? Do you know where your parents went to high school? Do you know what was happening around the time of your birth? Do you know an aunt or an uncle who may have had a problem that they overcame? The children who scored highest on this test, which is to say the children who knew more about their family history, scored higher on every study they tested and had a greater belief that they could control the world around them. It was the #1 predictor of a child's emotional well-being. And I mentioned that this research was done in 2001. In the summer of 2001, of course, what happened at the end of that year? At the end of that summer? 9/11. So this research was done in Atlanta. They went back and tested these kids again. And the kids who knew more about their family history were able to respond even to that national trauma better. And when I asked why, what Marshall said to me is there's 3 types of family stories. There's what we call an ascending family narrative. We had nothing, we worked hard, we have a lot. That's the ascending family narrative. There's the descending narrative. We had a lot, there was a war, a recession, a downturn, a storm, whatever, we lost it all. That's the descending family narrative. The third is what they call an oscillating family narrative. Okay, Grandpa came here, he worked hard, he got a good job, the house burned down. His daughter became the first in the family to go to college. She became the vice president of the bank. She got breast cancer. The children who understand that life is an oscillating story, not a linear story, understand that when they hit bumps in the road, and they will hit bumps in the road, that they have the ability to get through it. And that's the key thing here. And when I've talked about this, the #1 question I've gotten is what happens to adoptive kids, and it has nothing to do with blood. In fact, Marshall Duke has 3 children, one of whom is adopted. It has to do with the quality of the story. In fact, Marshall has said to me, the stories don't even have to be true. Now, this is he's like this wonderful Jewish grandfather. I mean, what could be more Jewish than this? He talked about the Yiddish Mama stories. And in fact, this happened to me a couple years ago. One of my daughters went through a period of about a month where she didn't want to go to school. She was very young. She was kind of not pre-verbal, but she didn't have access to her emotions. And we didn't know what was going on. We tried everything, okay? And then finally one day, channeling Marshall Duke, I literally sat down and I wrote her a note that said, I was talking to your grandmother, meaning my mother, and she reminded me that when I was your age, I went through a period like this, and I got through it. That's a totally made-up story. You can get this from books and movies and others, but it's helpful when it's people that you actually know. And I would like to suggest to you that when I'm sitting here telling you this, that this sounds familiar, and maybe you can do it, but I want to say it's hard. Because our instinct today in families is to protect the children around us. Not to let them know that we are in pain, that we have struggles, that we have work problems or money problems or health problems. And that comes out of a position of love, but I think it's not serving the families that we're in. So in an age-appropriate way, find a way to bring them into the struggles that you have, because you are arming them for the struggles that they're going to have, and what is a greater calling than that. The last thing, I mentioned there were 3, I'm not going to mention, but I just want to throw it out there not to leave you hanging. High-functioning families adapt all the time. They talk a lot. And the third actually sounds the easiest, but it's kind of hard. They go out and play. Okay? Decades of research and centuries of experience has shown us that all families have conflict. It is natural. You put people who with different personalities living in a tight space, add all the things that we've talked about, technology, working moms, involved dads, it's going to be difficult. The goal is to minimize the conflict and get on to making positive memories. So find a family member, go out, make a positive experience. Whatever you do, if you hike, if you cook, if you play games, if you watch movies, make a positive memory so that when the pressure is on, you'll be doing it from a position of strength. I was in high school when I first read Anna Karenina and encountered what is easily the most famous opening line in all of world literature. All happy families are alike. Each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. And when I first heard that, I thought, and this is a technical term, I'm like, that's idiotic. Of course all happy families are not alike, you know? Some are big, some are small, right? Some are boisterous, some are quiet. The experience I've had now thinking around the clock about families for more than a decade has taught me that Tolstoy may have been right. We've actually learned a lot about families, and there are certain things that we can do to bring positive habits into our family. Tolstoy was 5 years old, Leo Tolstoy, when his brother Nikolai came to him and said he had inscribed the secret to universal happiness on a little green stick. And if anybody ever found this stick, and he'd buried the stick in the family's ravine in Russia, and if anybody ever found it, the whole world would be bathed in happiness. Okay? So Leo spent his whole life looking for this stick. He was obsessed with happiness, which is why that line ended up at the beginning of Anna Karenina in the first place. Okay? Maybe you can get it from the library here tonight. But he never found it. And that is a great lesson for all of us. Because anybody who's looked at this knows that happiness is not something that we find. It's something that we make. It's something that we do. So my message to you, in whatever family you're in, at whatever stage of life the people in your family are in, you don't need to throw everything out. You don't need to scrap everything. You can take small steps, accumulate small wins, and keep reaching for that green stick. Because this may be the truest lesson of all. What's the secret to a happy family? Try. Thank you very much.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jim, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.